Hey, we're back out in the shop. We're doing a little bit of spring maintenance. This time we're working on the boat, or at least part of the boat. So this is the Outdrive from the boat. It's just very standard. It's kind of a older version, just a standard Mercruiser Outdrive. This is Alpha 1, Gen 1, so it's pretty old, but there really weren't a whole lot of differences between them. So this part here is this basically bolts up to the boat, and then this is the part that sits outside, and then this will pivot, and that kind of controls your angle of drive, I guess, and we can kind of show that a little bit later, but that's not really what we're working on today. What we're working on today is this is the lower unit. It's really hard to see on the stand here, but so that's the bottom, and there's some gears in there, and those shafts there are splines. That's where the propeller gets mounted to. So for now, I just got it taken off and just made this little stand so I can work on it on the workbench and stuff. So from this point down is very similar to what you would have on an outdrive of an outboard or a stern drive. So a stern drive has some sort of a automotive style engine inside the boat, and then you've got this gear, and then this shaft here basically splines into a coupler bolted to the flywheel of the regular engine. But this part here, basically from this point down, is not exactly the same, but it's functionally it's the same as if you've got a fishing boat or you've got anything with a self-contained outboard. It's going to be basically the same thing. So this here would mount, if it was just a regular outdrive, this part would mount to the shaft, and then there'd be an engine up here, and it would have a vertical crankshaft, and then it would just run straight down like that. So all I'm doing today is just double checking the impeller pump, and that's really about the only, besides changing the fluids, which is a different deal. So this is basically the water. The boat doesn't have a radiator, so it just has water that gets sucked out of the lake, and right there you can see that would be the intake. So as you're going through the water, those little holes are sucking in water, and then the water goes up, and basically this part of this would just be below the surface of the water all the time. So when you drop your engine into the water, this submerges, and so then water goes through those passages and comes up into this, in through this hole, and then you can see it's basically, the pump basically just surrounds the shaft that runs from the upper to the lower. And so again, we just got more splines, and eventually that's going to get some grease on it as well. So as that's spinning, this is kind of the maintenance piece that has to be taken, not the plastic piece here, but that little rubber six-sided, kind of looks like a lopsided, I don't know, an octopus with six sides, which obviously wouldn't be an octopus. So this is a little bit, there are a lot of pumps and a lot of gears that will work this way. So you can kind of see the way that these are bent over, and that's the part that I was checking. And I just put this in last year, so it only was in there for a year. And so let me wipe my hands here. So what ends up happening is as water gets sucked into this, as the water gets sucked in, kind of in this area is where it would get sucked in. As these spin around, you can see that the space compresses. And as the space compresses, so here you can kind of see the shaft of it is this shaft is offset from the whole thing. So as this thing spins around, see, so the water that gets caught into here as this wheel spins, that space gets smaller, and then that's smaller and smaller and smaller. So under pressure, then what ends up happening is when we put it onto this, so this is, you can see that's the passage down. So what ends up happening is as the water comes in, it transfers over to this slot, and you can see it kind of deadheads there. And then what happens is, if I can find the piece I took off of there. Oh, it's right here. So then what ends up happening is it ends up going up that shaft right there. So then this sits on here like a chimney, and that's kind of like your sort of like a radiator hose, and then that goes up, and then there's another passage in here, and then it gets transferred, and then it goes through, I think, this side here, And then there's another rubber fitting, and then that goes into the engine, and then it more or less transfers to just the regular, if you saw the earlier video, or if not, you'll see it. It's basically just a small block Chevy, and so that water just circulates throughout the water jacket on the engine. So when we put this down, and I got to put, so we've got some gaskets that slip on here, and this is all really straightforward. This is, I just was doing a checkup on it. So that goes on there, and then we've got, it's not really a key, but it's kind of like a key. So that just sits on there, and there's just a little, I can't really see it, but there's just a flat spot machined into the shaft. This little piece just sticks on there. Everything's got a lot of grease on it, so it stays there. And that effectively, you can see it's got a little bit of a groove on it, and that groove engages with that little slot in that rubber wheel there. I don't know if you can see that engagement somewhere right about there. And so all we do is we just slip this over, and so when this goes, okay, so I'm going to flip this over so the side where my thumb is closest to me, so you can see that that's kind of what ends up going to the, I don't know, I guess I'm calling it the chimney, but it's what goes up. So as the water comes in from the bottom, you can see that there's a passage. Yeah, you can kind of see my finger down under there. So all this gasket does is just kind of seals all the passages as well as possible. And then it, as it comes around here, then it basically comes up out of that and up into this area, or actually goes down into that, and that would connect to this side, and then that would force it up. So the wear issue that you're looking for if you ever get a boat and the boat's been sitting for a long time, change the fluid and just drain the water, not the water, yeah, drain the water. Hopefully water's out, especially in Wisconsin. There is, I don't know if you can see it on here, right there, if you're doing the maintenance, that's a drain plug, and that will drain all the oil, or the gear lube, I guess, that would go. All of this is kind of considered, there's a bunch of oil in there, and then the top and bottom are connected through this passage here on the side. So that ring, you just got to double check. It's kind of a flat, it's not really an O-ring, but it's got a little contour to it. So when these two pieces just mate down, there's no gasket or anything, that just connects to there. And then there's a passage that leads to this, and then there's gears up in here, which I'm not going to take apart, but then this is, you open that and you keep squeezing from the bottom, and you keep pumping it in the bottom till it oozes out of here, and that's kind of typical. There's a lot of gear cases and transmissions and gear differentials that will fill up that way. You don't fill from the top to the bottom, but you fill from the bottom and then make sure that there's no air gap, there's no air bubbles or anything if you fill from the bottom. So then when that starts to ooze out, plug this and then plug the bottom. But anyway, that's a whole different project. So again, if you ever buy a boat and you're going to maintain it, this is kind of handy to just double check. That's just slid in there. I'm not going to take it out because I know that groove lines up with where it is now. And because that impeller, that rubber impeller is offset, it's kind of a pain in the butt to take out. But basically, that's not something that you want to run without water. So when I do run the boat now, because it's a stern drive, basically when I run it, it's pretty much just like running an engine with no coolant, which is fine, as long as you don't run it for a long time and overheat it. So this just slips over there and kind of wiggle and twist just like any other shaft. Let's see if we can get that. Oh, that's not going to work, but this is another one of those impossible things to do one-handed. So that goes on there. This gasket comes down and just slides over. And I kind of wiped a bunch of grease off of there because there's splines and this thing is pretty tight. That just goes tight down on there, kind of seals that up. And yeah, then basically that's about as much as I'm going to do for maintenance on this. There isn't anything to do. This is effectively, you're looking down the exhaust manifold. The exhaust gases go down through there, and it's really hard to see on this video, but basically where that takes an angle, then it ends up shooting out through all of that gap, and that's effectively your muffler by releasing the gases out through the water. So anyway, that's about really all there is as far as maintenance. And the rest of this, you can find a manual to find where the bolts are, because on this model it's going to be different than if it's, you know, whatever brand, if it's a Yamaha or a Honda or a Johnson or an Evinrude or whatever your Outdrive is. Most of them are probably the same, but specifically this is what you'll do on a Mercruiser Outdrive.